The woman stood near the edge of the small airport, holding a plane travel bag that looked a little too worn for someone who traveled often. The morning air was cool, and the sound of engines rolled across the runway in slow waves. Most people nearby were busy with their own plans. Some were late, some were tired. No one really noticed her, and that was exactly how she liked it. She wore simple clothes. Nothing new, nothing old enough to stand out. Her shoes were practical, not stylish. Her hair was tied back without effort. If someone had been asked to describe her, they might have said she looked calm, maybe a bit distant, like someone waiting for a bus rather than standing near one of the most advanced air bases in the region. Around her, the place was alive. Ground crews moved with purpose. Radios crackled with short bursts of sound. A few young pilots walked past, laughing and talking loudly, trying to shake off nerves before another long day of training. Above them all, the sky was wide and clear, the kind pilots loved, the kind that promised speed and danger at the same time. The woman looked up for a moment when a jet roared overhead. The sound was sharp and powerful, cutting through the air. Some people flinched, others covered their ears. She did neither. She simply followed the jet with her eyes, tracking it until it disappeared into the distance. There was something natural in the way she did it, like her eyes already knew where the aircraft would go next. A security officer nearby noticed her for just a second, not because she looked suspicious, but because she looked too relaxed. Most civilians near the base showed some mix of excitement and fear. She showed none. Still, he said nothing and turned back to the screen. Rules were rules, and she had all the right papers. She shifted her bag from one hand to the other and checked the time. She hated waiting, but she had learned patience long ago. Waiting was part of the job back then. Long hours, long silences, moments where everything depended on a single decision made in seconds. A group of visitors walked past, pointing toward the runway. One of them talked loudly about fighter jets, guessing their speed, getting most of the facts wrong. She almost smiled but stopped herself. Correcting people had never been worth the trouble. Let them believe what they wanted. It was easier that way. Another jet took off, faster this time. The ground shook slightly. A few loose items rattled. She noticed small details most others missed, like the timing of the engine sound and the angle climb. Old habits never really left. They just waited quietly. She moved toward a bench and sat down, placing her bag carefully at her feet. Her posture was straight, but not stiff. Comfortable, but ready. Anyone watching closely might have thought she was military once, or maybe law enforcement. But no one was watching closely enough. Her phone buzzed once. A short message appeared. No name, just a time and a location. She read it, nodded to herself, and locked the screen. Things were moving faster than expected. That was fine. She had adapted to worse. Nearby, a maintenance crew discussed a minor issue with one of the aircraft. It wasn't serious, but it had delayed a scheduled flight. The woman listened without appearing to listen. The words reached her easily. Her mind sorted them, tested them, and quietly dismissed the risk. It would be handled. It always was. She thought briefly about how strange life had become. Once, every step she took mattered to someone watching a screen miles away. Once, her voice had carried weight in the air, clear and steady, even when everything else was chaos. Now, she stood in line like everyone else, waiting her turn, blending into the background. A child nearby covered his ears as another jet passed low. The woman leaned slightly and said, softly, that it would be over soon. Her voice was calm. Sure. The child relaxed almost immediately. His parent gave her a thankful look. She nodded and looked away. Time passed. The sun rose higher. The air warmed. Activity increased. A briefing must have ended because several pilots appeared at once, their faces focused now, joking replaced by quiet concentration. As they walked past, one of them glanced at the woman, without knowing why. Something about her felt familiar, though he had never seen her before. She met his eyes for half a second. No challenge, no pride, just awareness. He looked away, unsettled, and kept walking. He told himself it was nothing, probably just nerves. The woman stood again and adjusted the strap of her bag. She was closer to the runway now. Too close for comfort, some might say, but she knew exactly where she was allowed to be. She always did. A sudden change in radio chatter caught her attention. Voices sharpened. Words came faster. Nothing dramatic yet, but enough to signal a shift. She stopped walking and listened, her head tilted slightly, as if trying to hear something far away. Most people around her noticed nothing. To them, it was just background noise, part of the place. To her, it was information, familiar patterns, familiar tension. She exhaled slowly. Whatever was about to happen, it was not part of her plan. But plans change. They always had. And when they did, she had learned long ago how to respond. Still, to anyone watching, she was just an ordinary civilian standing near an air base, waiting like everyone else. And no one yet suspected that the skies above had once answered to her voice. The morning had fully arrived, and the sun now made the runway shimmer with heat. The woman stood a little closer to the action, her eyes scanning the movements around her. The small airport had become busier with each passing minute. Trucks moved supplies. Ground crews checked aircraft with precise gestures. Everyone had a role, and everyone knew it. She noticed the subtle ways pilots carried themselves. There was a rhythm to it, a confidence hidden beneath the surface. Even in casual moments, their posture, the tilt of their heads, and the quickness of their gestures revealed the training they had gone through. She had seen it before many times, in places far away from here, and she recognized the signs instantly. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, short and coded, giving her coordinates and a time. She didn't reply. No need to. Instructions were instructions. Following them was enough. She slipped the phone back into her bag and adjusted the strap, checking the alignment of her bag, so it wouldn't slide while she moved. A low roar sounded overhead. The F-22s had begun their morning exercise. Jets took off one after another, their engines screaming through the sky. Most people nearby watched with excitement, hands shading their eyes from the sun. She did not. She noted the timing between takeoffs, the small delays in engine pitch, and the way the jets banked in formation. Every detail, a piece of a puzzle that only someone trained could see. She stood there quietly, letting others enjoy the show while her mind cataloged each movement. A pilot walking past, helmet under his arm, glanced at her for a moment. Something flickered in his eyes, a recognition he couldn't place. Her posture was too relaxed, her eyes too steady. He felt a subtle tension rise, but he shook it off, telling himself he was imagining things. Pilots often imagine things. The skies had a way of making the mind trick itself. A loud announcement came from the control tower, a routine check on communications. They said, the radio chatter rose for a moment, then quieted. Her ears perked up instinctively. She did not need to understand every word. The tone, the pauses, the minor mistakes told her enough. She could hear what others could not. It was habit, not skill. Years of listening without being heard herself. She moved slowly toward a quieter spot, keeping herself in the shadow of a small hangar, her presence still unnoticed. She allowed herself to watch closely. One jet turned unexpectedly, as if testing something. She noted the adjustment, the subtle shift in angle. The pilot inside did not know he was being observed by someone who had once relied on these same adjustments to save lives. He would never notice. That was fine. A young mechanic stumbled slightly, carrying a crate. She stepped forward just in time to catch it before it hit the ground. No words were exchanged. No acknowledgement needed. Some people she had learned to help without recognition, and some she had learned to observe without interference. Today it was just habit. Then came a moment that made her pause. A message over the radio, brief and unusual, not part of the routine. Her head tilted slightly, listening. The words were quick, clipped, and to the point. Something was happening that did not belong to a training exercise. She knew immediately. The tension in control tower and the slight rigidity in the pilot's stances told her everything she needed to know. Her pulse quickened, though she did not show it. Years ago, this exact feeling would have sent her running to a communications hub Headset in hand, voice ready. Now she stayed still. Observation first. Reaction second. Always observation first. A group of pilots lined up for the next exercise. Their movements were sharp, almost rehearsed. But she noticed a minor hesitation in one of them. It was the tiniest detail, almost invisible. He adjusted his helmet twice before putting it on. He shifted weight from one foot to the other. His hand moved slightly faster than necessary. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Something was off. The jets rose into the sky, following the usual routes, but her mind was elsewhere. The abnormal radio message, the hesitation of the pilot, the subtle changes in routine. They all pointed to something more than a simple morning exercise. A test, perhaps, or a situation brewing beyond the ordinary. She moved a few steps closer to the runway, careful not to draw attention. Her bag pressed lightly against her side, ready to move, ready to act if needed. Every instinct from years of training whispered silently to her, reminding her of speed, precision, and awareness. A voice came over the radio that made her stop completely. It was not loud, not even clear at first, but she recognized it immediately. A call sign that was spoken with respect, a tone that only a few would ever use lightly. Eagle One. Her heart did not race. She did not show any outward sign of surprise. But inside, a memory sparked. Years ago, that call sign had been hers. Every pilot knew it. Every mission had answered to it. And now, she heard it again, not in the controlled environment of her past, but here, in the open, where it carried the weight of authority even she no longer commanded. The pilots nearby shifted subtly. One of them glanced at another, unsure why the call sign had been used. Recognition spread quickly. Something about the voice, the timing, and the situation triggered their memories. Eagle One was legendary. Few had ever commanded that call sign, and fewer still carried it into civilian life without recognition. The woman did not move. She did not speak. But every muscle in her body responded instinctively to the sound. The habits from the sky, from the cockpit, from missions long past, they all returned for a brief moment. Her mind cataloged, analyzed, and prepared for what might come next. A pilot broke the small tension by speaking to another, but his words were cautious. He glanced at her, confusion mixed with respect. He did not recognize her fully, but something about her presence, her posture, and her calmness reminded him of what he had learned to follow in the air. Focus, precision, and authority. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was acknowledgement, nothing more. The world around her continued, oblivious to the significance of her recognition. To the casual observer, she was still just a civilian watching jets. To the trained eyes of the pilots, however, the air had shifted. Something they could not name yet, but would not forget, had entered their midst. The woman checked her watch. The time was almost exact to the message she had received. Everything was moving according to plan. She adjusted her bag again, keeping her movements natural, relaxed, but ready. Observation, then action. Always observation first. The jets completed their routine maneuvers and began to descend toward the runway. Pilots communicated with the tower, confirming status, reporting minor adjustments. Nothing unusual for an outsider, but she knew better. The subtle signs, the minor hesitations, the call sign, they all meant that this morning would not pass like any other. She shifted slightly, stepping into a better vantage point without drawing notice. Her eyes followed the movements of the jets and the pilots on the ground. Each small action told a story, a sequence of cause and effect that only someone who had lived it could interpret. To others, it was just noise. To her, it was everything. As the F-22s touched down, rolling along the runway, she noticed one pilot removing his helmet slightly faster than the others, frowning at a small display in the cockpit. Another adjusted his gloves twice before securing the clasp. These were minor details, but to her trained eye, they hinted at something unusual, something she would have dealt with in seconds if she had still been in the sky. She exhaled slowly, feeling the tension ease slightly. Observation was complete. The next step would come soon, she knew, and when it did, she would respond with the precision that had earned her the call sign in the first place. But for now, she remained a quiet figure among the crowd, a civilian unnoticed, yet fully aware of everything unfolding around her. People moved past her, talking, laughing, arguing about the jets they had seen. She smiled faintly to herself. Let them enjoy their morning. Let them remain oblivious to the threads of history brushing past them. Some things were better left unspoken, some legacies better carried silently. Her gaze lifted once more to the sky, where the last F-22 had disappeared over the horizon. The sound lingered in the air, a reminder of speed, power, and control. She adjusted her bag, straightened her posture, and waited. Observation done. Action awaited. And when the time came, the world would realize, once again, Had Eagle One had not been forgotten. The sound of engines still echoed faintly over the airfield, but new tension had settled in the air. The woman remained near the hangar, watching carefully as pilots and crew moved with renewed focus. The casual morning chatter had faded, replaced with quiet, purposeful motions. Something had shifted, something subtle, but unmistakable to those who could read the signs. A young pilot, the same one who had hesitated before, now glanced toward the woman with more intensity. There was recognition beginning to dawn, though he could not place it fully. The way she held herself, her calm eyes scanning the activity. It was familiar, uncomfortably familiar. He remembered training exercises, strategy briefings, and scenarios where timing and decision meant life or death. Her presence brought all of that back in a flash. The woman noticed him looking. She did not flinch. She did not smile. She simply allowed a tiny acknowledgement, a subtle tilt of her head, almost imperceptible. That was enough. The tension in the young pilot's shoulders eased slightly, replaced by curiosity and cautious respect. He spoke softly to his wingman, words clipped and careful. "Do you see her? There's something about her." Another pilot overheard and turned, scanning the area. His eyes landed on her for only a moment, but it was enough. Something clicked, and his breath caught slightly. Recognition spread like wildfire. "Eagle One," he whispered, almost involuntarily. The others nearby froze, unsure whether to acknowledge the call sign out loud. It was not a name used lightly. The woman's heart remained steady. Years of experience had taught her to control outward reactions. Inside, however, a small spark of awareness lit up. She had not expected her presence to stir so quickly, even in such a controlled environment. But the pilot's reactions were natural. Respect and recognition often came faster than words. Her mind moved methodically. Observation first, assessment second. There was no immediate threat, no urgency requiring action yet. The pilots were reacting, trying to reconcile memory with reality. That was the perfect moment to gauge their understanding and readiness. She watched as they adjusted posture, exchanged quick glances, and repositioned themselves slightly. Every movement told a story. One of the more experienced pilots stepped forward cautiously. He was older, calm, and his eyes carried the weight of countless hours in the air. He looked directly at her, not with surprise, but with careful assessment. "Eagle One," he asked quietly, testing the waters. The woman simply nodded, a small, deliberate motion. That single gesture confirmed what they had begun to suspect. The civilian among them was someone whose reputation had not faded, whose influence had not waned. The younger pilot stiffened, unsure how to proceed. Some were honored, others nervous. Their training had always emphasized hierarchy, respect, and recognition command. They had studied her strategies and decisions in manuals, videos, and simulations. They had never expected to meet her in person. Certainly not here, in this quiet civilian setting. The woman moved slightly, maintaining her calm demeanor. She did not speak, but her presence alone demanded attention. The older pilot continued cautiously. "It's been years," he said, almost to himself. "We never thought." His words trailed off, but the meaning was clear. He had thought she had left that world entirely. Apparently, she had only stepped away from the public eye. She tilted her head, listening to the radio chatter that had returned to normal, if only slightly. Her eyes scanned the horizon, noticing subtle adjustments in the pilot's approach and the way the jets were aligned. It was all routine on the surface, but small deviations hinted at something more. She observed, cataloged, and prepared mentally for any scenario that might unfold. The younger pilot who had first recognized her took a deep breath and stepped forward. I've studied your missions, he admitted quietly, almost ashamed. I never thought I'd meet you like this. She allowed herself a faint smile, just enough to convey acknowledgement without indulgence. That was all she needed. Words were unnecessary. Actions had always spoken louder, and now, once again, her presence communicated authority, experience, and calm. Another pilot, standing slightly apart, whispered to his colleague, "Eagle One?" "Really?" The colleague nodded, eyes wide. "It has to be. Nobody else carries that call sign." "Nobody." The woman noticed a ripple of whispers and stifled surprise. She had left that life, yet it still followed her, quietly and persistently. Respect and recognition traveled faster than memory, faster than time. She had not expected it here, but it was inevitable. Legends did not fade simply because someone chose to live quietly. A few crew members lingered nearby, unsure why the pilots had become suddenly tense. They saw nothing unusual. To them, she was just another civilian, calm and observant. They had no idea of the history being acknowledged in hushed tones and subtle gestures. The older pilot cleared his throat. "We didn't think we'd ever hear Eagle One again," he said softly. "Not here. Not like this." Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering. No explanation needed. Her past was known to those who needed to know. She had no intention of reminding anyone unnecessarily. She had already done enough. Actions mattered more than words, and presence carried its own authority. The younger pilots exchanged glances, still processing reality of what they were witnessing. One of them, the same who had spoken before, swallowed hard and said quietly, It's an honor, really." She nodded once more, subtle and deliberate. That was enough. Their acknowledgement was received, their respect felt, and the tension began to ease slightly. The pilots resumed their movements, still cautious, still aware, but no longer uncertain. The presence of someone legendary among them was stabilizing rather than threatening. She turned slightly, her gaze moving to the remaining pilots, and the jet still lined up on the runway. The morning had grown warmer, the sun higher in the sky. Everything continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Respect, memory, and quiet acknowledgement lingered, like a shadow cast long after the source had moved. A young mechanic approached the older pilot hesitantly, noticing the subtle tension but not fully understanding it. "Is everything okay?" he asked. His voice carried curiosity, but no concern. The older pilot glanced at him and smiled faintly. "Everything's fine," he said. "Just someone important passing by." The woman, observing this exchange from a slight distance, felt a small measure of satisfaction. No need for explanations. No need for stories. Presence alone was enough. She had returned briefly to the world that had once defined her, and the recognition had arrived naturally, quietly, with respect rather than fanfare. She checked her watch again, noting the time and the pace at which the pilots were moving. Everything was on schedule, yet different now. Different because she was here. Different because a quiet acknowledgement had reminded them of the authority and precision that once commanded the skies. The young pilot who had first recognized her lingered a moment longer, then adjusted his helmet and returned to his post. Every move was careful, deliberate. He could not erase the awareness that she was present, nor the knowledge that someone legendary, once so distant and untouchable, was standing nearby. She watched him, then shifted her gaze back to the runway. The jets were ready for the next exercise, engines humming with quiet energy. But she remained still. Observation first, action second. Always observation first. That habit never left, even when the world had changed around her. The older pilot turned slightly, giving her one more subtle nod of acknowledgement. She returned it, small and deliberate. It was enough. They understood. They had learned, once again, that some figures could command attention without a word, without a display, simply by being present. As the morning moved forward, she stayed near the hangar, allowing herself to blend once more into the civilian background. Casual observers noticed nothing unusual. To them, She was just another person, waiting, calm and quiet. But to the pilots, to those who had once looked up to her in the skies, she was a living reminder of precision, authority, and the weight of experience. The subtle tension remained, a quiet pulse in the air. The acknowledgement of the past had been made, but the future, the next moments, were still unwritten. The woman remained ready, observing, calculating. Every movement, every glance, every sound was cataloged and analyzed. She had learned long ago that the world could change in an instant, and she had to be ready. And so, she stood, a quiet figure among the bustling airfield, a civilian to the untrained eye, and yet, to those who had studied her work and known her name, the legend of Eagle One had returned, acknowledged in silence, commanding attention without a word, shaping the day simply by being present. The woman shifted slightly, stepping out from the shadow of the hangar to get a clearer view of the runway. The jets had paused their exercises for now, pilots and crews adjusting to the unusual tension that lingered. She watched them carefully, not because she had to, but because she always had to know what was happening around her. Years of training had made observation almost second nature. A few of the older pilots lingered near the edge of the field, exchanging whispers. Their voices were low, careful, almost reverent. The name she had once carried, Eagle One, was no longer just a call signed them. It was history, a record of missions that had been studied, analyzed, and remembered. She remembered those missions herself. The planning, the hours, the risks. Memories came back in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle she had long left behind. Her mind drifted to the first time she had earned that call sign. It had been a mission that tested every skill she had learned, every ounce of focus, every decision she could make in seconds. A rescue operation in difficult skies, limited visibility, and countless unknowns. The mission had succeeded, saving lives and demonstrating precision few could match. Her leadership had been decisive, calm, and unwavering. And from that day, the call sign had followed her, a symbol of excellence and reliability. Now, decades later, she had returned to a civilian life, deliberately stepping away from recognition. She had thought her past would remain in the shadows, known only to those who needed to know. Yet here, in the open, her reputation had found her again. The young pilot's awe, the older pilot's cautious respect, even the subtle adjustments in posture and tone, they all acknowledged the weight of her history without words. A conversation drifted near her, though she was far enough not to hear details. The tone, the rhythm, and the cautious respect told her enough. They spoke of tactics, of the missions they had simulated, of decisions that echoed her strategies. She did not intervene. Observation first, as always. Listening quietly, she let them remember, learn, and respect on her own. Sometimes, the influence of the past was strongest when it was silent. A pilot approached, the one who had first recognized her. He walked carefully, as if each step required permission. He stopped a few feet away, and they exchanged a quiet look. No words were necessary. In that moment, everything unspoken, the history, the expertise, the command, was understood. She gave a faint nod, acknowledging him, reinforcing the respect without needing to explain herself. That small gesture spoke volumes. She thought about the many missions she had led, the decisions made under pressure, the people who had relied on her judgment. She had once flown in extreme conditions, guided teams through danger, and been trusted to make life-and-death decisions in moments that seemed to stretch endlessly. Every pilot who had studied her tactics knew the principles, but none could fully feel the weight of the choices she had carried. The young pilot glanced toward the older men still observing from a distance. One of them spoke quietly, enough for only the closest to hear. She doesn't need to say anything. You can feel it. You know she's the one who made those missions work. The words were simple, but the meaning was profound. Experience, leadership, and courage did not need to be explained. They were visible in presence, in poise, in the calm that came even when tension filled the air. She had carried that calm for decades, and even in civilian life, it radiated naturally. Another flashback came unbidden. A night operation, low visibility, hostile territory. She had relied on instincts honed through countless drills, her team trusting her implicitly. Every decision had been deliberate. every risk calculated, every life accounted for. She had known then what she knew now. Leadership was not about authority. It was about responsibility, precision, and calm control in chaos. The young pilot shifted slightly, unsure what to say. "We've all read about Eagle One," he murmured. "The missions, the strategies. I didn't think it was real. I mean, someone who actually did those things." The woman smiled faintly, not with pride, but with understanding. She had never sought recognition. Action had always mattered more than words. Saving lives, making decisions that ensured safety and success, guiding others through chaos. That had been her reward. Fame had never been part of the mission. Her gaze swept the airfield again, noting every detail. The jets, the crews, the way the pilots moved with precision. She remembered the countless hours she had spent training, leading, and coordinating, and she recognized the echoes of her influence in the current generation. They had learned from her, even if they had never known her personally. Her tactics, her decisions, her leadership had become part of the standard. It was a legacy she carried quietly. She remembered the first time she had met the young recruits she now saw as pilots. She had been strict, demanding, and exacting, but fair. Each had been tested, challenged, pushed to limits they had not thought possible. And each had succeeded, guided by the principles she instilled: observation, patience, and decisive action. Those principles had remained, carried forward by those who had trained under her guidance. The older pilot approached her cautiously, a quiet nod of acknowledgement given again. He did not need to ask questions. He already understood. Experience spoke for itself. The weight of years, the precision of judgment, and the calm control over chaos were evident in her demeanor. He respected her, not as a civilian, but as a leader she had been and still was, in subtle ways. She glanced briefly at the young pilot again, sensing both admiration and nervousness. "It's okay," she said softly, voice calm and measured. "You're doing well. Just trust your training." The words were simple, but they carried authority, experience, and reassurance. The young pilot straightened slightly, a tension leaving his shoulders. He understood. Even without commands, the advice, the presence, and the calm radiated from her. He had seen the difference that experience and leadership made. A few other pilots lingered nearby, observing the exchange, understanding that someone legendary was in their midst. The realization was quiet but powerful. Recognition had arrived not with spectacle, but with subtle acknowledgement and respect. The weight of her history had returned to the field, not as a memory, but as a presence. She looked around once more, noticing the details that only someone trained for years could see: the alignment of equipment, the slight tension in muscles, the rhythms of communication. Everything told her that the day would proceed smoothly, but she remained aware, alert, and ready. Observation first, action second. The habit never left. Her bag remained at her side, simple and worn, her clothing unremarkable. Yet in the quiet awareness she carried, she embodied the legacy of leadership, precision, and calm control. Those who knew understood. Those who did not would simply see a quiet, unassuming civilian, unaware of the history she carried. The young pilot spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "I can't believe it. After all these years." She gave a subtle nod, an acknowledgement of both his awe and the truth of her history. She had once led teams through impossible situations. She had made decisions that saved lives, commanded respect, and set standards for generations of pilots. And now, standing quietly in a civilian setting, that influence persisted, silent yet undeniable. She took a deep breath, letting the morning air fill her lungs. The jets had moved to a holding pattern. The crews adjusted to routine once again. The world seemed to continue as usual, but those who understood felt the weight of history, recognition, and respect. She had returned, quietly and deliberately, reminding them of the principles that mattered most. And as she stood there, calm and poised, the story of Eagle One was not told in words or fame, but in presence, awareness, and the subtle acknowledgement of those who had once followed her commands and those who now carried forward her legacy. Her past, hidden yet powerful, had returned to influence the present, a reminder that true leadership leaves an enduring mark, whether recognized or not. The afternoon sun had grown stronger, casting long shadows across the runway and hangars. The woman stood quietly near the edge of the field, her bag resting lightly against her side. The initial tension among the pilots and crews had eased, replaced by a sense of respect and subtle acknowledgement that lingered in the air. The call sign Eagle One had left its mark, quiet but indelible. She watched as pilots prepared for the next exercise. Their movements were precise, confident, but different now. There was a lightness in their steps, a clarity in their gestures. They carried an invisible weight with them, a quiet influence left by someone who had led from experience, not ego. She did not interfere, did not instruct, but her presence alone seemed to steady them. One of the young pilots, the one who had first recognized her, lingered near a maintenance area, glancing occasionally toward her. His eyes carried a mix of curiosity, admiration, and a hint of nervousness. He wanted to speak, to say something that would make sense of the situation, but the words failed him. Instead, he nodded subtly, acknowledging the past and the present without disturbing the calm she maintained. The woman moved slowly, deliberately, keeping to the shadows yet allowing herself to be visible when necessary. She observed every detail, the alignment of aircraft, the movement of the crew, the subtle shifts in posture and attention among the pilots. Everything was normal on the surface, yet she could feel the echoes of her influence in every action. It was quiet, almost invisible to others, but unmistakable to those trained to notice. Her mind wandered briefly to the lives she had touched during her career, decisions that had saved people, moments that had required absolute calm and precision, choices that had been weighed and acted upon in seconds. She remembered the gratitude, the respect, and the subtle nods of acknowledgement that had never needed words. Those memories were quiet victories, invisible to the world, but deeply meaningful. A group of pilots moved past her, their conversation low and careful. One of them mentioned a strategy she had once pioneered. She allowed herself a slight smile, though they did not see it. Her methods had become standard practice, studied and followed by the next generation. Influence had a way of outlasting recognition, and she had learned that early in her career. The young pilot approached her finally, voice low and measured. "I don't know if you realize it, but you've changed the way we all think about the sky," he said softly. "Not just the maneuvers, but everything." She looked at him calmly, eyes steady. "It's not about me," she replied quietly. "It's about understanding, observation, and trust. That is what lasts. That is what matters." He nodded slowly, absorbing the words and the meaning behind them. Respect did not always need spectacle. Leadership did not always require commands. Sometimes the quiet presence of someone who had done it all before was enough to guide and inspire. The older pilots exchanged a few words among themselves, glancing back at her. Their tone was quiet, reverent, and reflective. They spoke of decisions she had made, missions that had been successful, and the legacy of calm control she had left behind. None of it was new to them, but seeing her now in civilian life reminded them of the principles that mattered most: observation, patience, precision, and responsibility. She moved toward the exit of the airfield, her steps unhurried, her posture relaxed. Her journey through the world of jets and missions had taught her the importance of timing, of knowing when to step forward and when to remain unseen. Today, she had reminded those around her without a word, without fanfare, simply by being present. A pilot called out softly as she passed, "Thank you, Eagle One." The words were simple, yet they carried weight, not for glory, not for recognition, but for acknowledgement. They recognized what she had taught them, what she had modeled, and what her quiet presence continued to inspire. She nodded, faint but deliberate, acknowledging the sentiment without pausing. It was enough. Words were not needed to complete the circle. Influence, respect, and legacy carried forward silently, shaping the next moments without demand for attention or applause. As she walked toward the gate, the field behind her hummed with activity. Jets were lined up, ready for the next training sequence. Crews moved with practiced efficiency. Pilots readied themselves, carrying forward the lessons embedded in their actions by those who had gone before. Her shadow passed across the runway briefly, unnoticed by most, yet it left a subtle reminder in the minds of those who had witnessed her presence. A soft breeze carried the faint scent of fuel and the warmth of the sun. She inhaled deeply, feeling the calm and the clarity that always came when observation was complete and action was unnecessary. This was her world, once commanded and now quietly observed. The skills and knowledge and the presence remained, even when unrecognized. The impact was invisible, but it was there, shaping the next generation. She glanced back once more, catching a glimpse of a young pilot watching her from afar. His eyes reflected curiosity, awe, and the understanding that he had been in the presence of someone remarkable. He would carry that memory, that influence, and the lessons of calm precision forward into his own career. The ripple effect of leadership was subtle but enduring. The gate loomed ahead, simple and unassuming. Beyond it, the civilian world awaited. Quiet streets, ordinary tasks, and the absence of controlled chaos of the airfield. She stepped through calmly, her bag at her side, her posture relaxed. She had fulfilled her role, not with recognition, but with presence, influence, and quiet authority. As she walked away from the airfield, her mind reflected briefly on the journey she had taken. The missions, the decisions, the responsibility, and the lives touched, all of it had formed a legacy that did not require fanfare. True leadership was measured not by words, but by impact, and hers had endured through those who now carried forward her principles. The day continued around her. The hum of activity at the airfield, the distant roar of jets, and the quiet movement of personnel all went on, seemingly unchanged. Yet for those who had been attentive, who had recognized the presence of Eagle One, the day had shifted. They had glimpsed history, witnessed influence, and felt the subtle weight of experience and leadership that transcended time. She stepped onto a quiet road beyond the airfield, blending seamlessly into the civilian world once again. The bag at her side, simple clothes, calm demeanor. She became just another person moving through life. Yet the mark she had left lingered, unspoken but deeply felt. The young pilots would carry it forward. The older pilots would remember it with respect, and she would continue her life quietly, confident that the influence of her presence had reached where it needed to go. As she walked further, the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows and bathing the world in warm light. The airfield behind her was alive with activity, yet it had been subtly changed by her presence. The principles of observation, precision, calm control, and responsibility had been quietly reinforced. The legacy of Eagle One continued, unannounced, uncelebrated, and unforgotten. She did not look back again. She did not need to. The pilots and crews would carry forward the lessons without reminder, guided by the subtle influence she had imparted. True leadership, she knew, was measured not by recognition but by enduring effect. Her work, her presence, her calm and precise observation had achieved exactly that, and so she walked on quietly, deliberately, a civilian in appearance, yet a legend in action, her legacy continuing in every movement, every decision, and every pilot who had been fortunate enough to witness her presence. The story of Eagle One had been quietly told, leaving the airfield to pilots and the next generation forever aware that some influence transcends recognition, remaining powerful simply because it was real, deliberate, and enduring.